Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga Man Drew, and I'm here to do my breakdown for My Hero Academia, Season 6, Episode 23. And this was an amazing episode because we finally got the conclusion of DEKU versus Class 1A and was done in a spectacular manner. And we'll see how great it was right now. Because the title of this episode derives from manga chapter 320 by the same name, DEKU vs. Class 1A. And this episode itself covers chapters 320 to 322. And once again, we start off the episode with a sort of recap of what we saw at the end of last episode with DEKU about to confront Class 1A. And we do get to see a standoff between DEKU and the other members of Class 1A, as we actually begin with a flashback that is not necessarily in the manga of the Stain fight, where DEKU gives a declaration that the reasoning why he's there to save Ida is because as a hero, what he learned from All Might is that he needs to stick his nose in places even if he belongs there or not. And this is very important because even though this is a flashback that was not in the manga, it is very important for what these next few scenes and this big moment involving Class 1A is about, specifically when it involves Ida. And from here, the fight will begin a little bit more in earnest, where we do get confirmation that Class 1A does know at least about Deku's newer quirks. And as the fight begins, Deku actually unleashes his smokescreen, but we see that the heroes, specifically Bakugo, have counters for his quirks, where we get a new move from Bakugo via the name of Landmine Blast that is able to blow the smokescreen away. And from this point, we get a large chunk of the episode, which is more or less focusing on the characters of Class 1A and them having a chance to communicate with Deku, while also showing a little bit more of character development or character growth, as well as we get some flashbacks that are expanded upon or are just new to this part of the episode, which are going to be reused from past episodes in the past few seasons. And so I'll go over more or less each character and whether or not they actually got development from this episode, and really explain what that development means for the characters if they had any, as well as indicate whether or not the flashback that we got was something new or something that we got from previous episodes. And what is interesting is the first character that we actually start off with is Koda, where this is very important for his character because the fact that he's talking for longer periods of time and is the first one to actually speak to Deku, which really shows how much his character has grown from the previous arcs, where he starts off being very quiet, but over time he becomes more and more vocal because he has become closer with the students of Class 1A and become actual friends with them. And next from there, we actually get to see Sarah, which does not have any prominent development or growth from this moment. However, we do get an expanded flashback of Sarah trading with Deku that is not necessarily in the manga, where we see that training between him and Deku really improved on Deku's ability to use his quirk, while also just making Sarah very happy and just showing that he does care about Deku in a very meaningful way. And next, we do get Jiro, who we do get more development and growth, as well as a flashback from her, as well as a new move that she premieres in this episode, which is Heartbeat Wall, which unfortunately Deku is able to dodge. But we do get, once again, another expanded flashback from her that is not necessarily in the manga, where we see that she's very happy and was very excited about Deku helping her during the cultural festival, and how Deku was able to give her notes on how she could take notes for the other characters in the class, which is interesting because she says that she wrote a lot, which is most likely in reference to how Deku also takes a lot of notes. So the parallel here is that Deku inspired Jiro to do something that he would similarly do in his notebook, and that they're both able to do it because they love what they were doing in that moment, Jiro with music and Deku with studying heroes. And this shows that Deku really did motivate and change Jiro to allow her to develop more as a character, as well as grow as a character, combining her love for music with being a hero, as this is seen during the cultural festival. And probably the one that I enjoyed most of this entire sequence actually involves Ojiro, because we see that Ojiro also gets into the fray and uses a technique that we've actually seen prior. But what is interesting is the development that we get in this moment, and how we recontextualize the scene that we saw between Deku and Jiro during the sports festival, and we learn how impactful Deku getting mad on Ojiro's behalf during the sports festival actually really affected Jiro, and it's something that he did not forget from this moment. really showing how much Ojiro actually cares about Deku, and that it all started from that one moment that Deku got mad on his behalf, even though at this moment they really didn't know each other. So it really shows that that was a very crucial moment for Ojiro's development and growth as a character, as well as his appreciation for Deku. And while this is happening, we do get some flashbacks that are in the manga of Deku remembering what happened during the war and how he does not want anyone to be harmed in that same fashion. But we do get a cut panel that involves Bakugo getting impaled that is not shown in this episode, but is in the manga. But going off from there, we do get Sato, and he is another character that really doesn't get that much real development or growth shown in this episode, but he does bring up and mention an interaction that he had with Deku when it comes to the fact that he was the character that provided Deku with the food coloring so that he could give an apple or candy apple to Eri during the cultural festival. So it was a minor interaction, but something that really stuck with Sato. And another character that really didn't have a lot of development shown in this episode includes Momo, and how for her part of this entire plan and trying to entrap and put Deku to sleep, she provides some information about how they're able to do this, and it's because they are also working alongside Endeavor, and that allows them to actually go out and try and rescue Deku in this moment. Which makes sense, because even though at this moment the heroes are still in a broken society, this society still has rules that they have to adhere to, and that includes them not being able to go out on their own and use their quirks without the permission of a pro hero. And this entire sequence, we get another character by the name of Kaminari, who also doesn't really get that much real development or growth shown in this episode. However, you could argue that the development that we get in this episode is a confirmation that even though he recognizes that he and Deku do not have that many things in common, that he still views Deku as a friend, which is why he's actually here to help. But going into the next characters that we get, these are going to be characters that we actually get to see prominent development with when it comes to their interactions with Deku in this moment. For instance, we do get some development and growth from Shoji as he remembers the moment where Deku told him, as well as the other students during the Forest Training Camp arc, about how along with him and the other characters that they would give All Might a run for his money as a group of heroes that could potentially take him on. And what we get in this flashback, which is actually reused footage, we see that this moment actually impacted Shoji in a very important way and allowed Shoji to really build a connection with Deku in this moment that we may not have seen in that initial interaction. And going on a little bit more of that, we also get to see Tokoyami begin to interact with Deku and really show his development and growth as well. Because as we get a new move from Tokoyami in this moment via Ragnarok Womb, we actually get a reused moment as a flashback from the sports festival where Tokoyami more or less thanks Deku for showing him the light of using his dark shadow in a defensive way while also being offensive. So this is very interesting because we see that throughout this entire episode, we see all of the characters in one way or another contribute to trying to stop and help Deku and try to save them while using their quirks in ways that only they can. But unfortunately, it was not enough to keep Deku down, as we do get a small moment that is very infamous for what was in the manga when it comes to the line that Kaminari says, which is basically for Deku to take a bath. But in the scene, there is an added moment with Kaminari using his quirk, which is not necessarily shown explicitly in the manga, which makes sense because even though they are not trying to hurt him in this moment, which Deku realizes later on, the electricity could have been used to at least stun him in a way for him to be restrained and potentially brought back to UA if it worked. And once again, we do get a little bit more of inner dialogue from Deku, and we also get a cool interaction of his mask flying off his face as he realizes that the students of Class 1A are not trying to harm him in the slightest because his danger sense is not going off, but how he still wants to try and protect them, as we get a well-animated sequence of Shoto using his heaven-piercing ice wall to stop Deku, and how this was done in a very well-animated scene. And from here, we get into more or less the final developments from this episode, which involve both Shoto and Froppy. And how with Froppy, we do get a reused flashback after the Camino incident, where it was when she was crying and thought that they couldn't be friends anymore, but the development that we see from this moment is that she's no longer willing to cry anymore, and how she is willing to follow Deku down the path because he wants to be a comic book hero, and that everyone in Class 1A, including Froppy, will be willing willing to follow him down that path because they are friends. And this is kind of the running theme for this entire episode when it comes to these characters' development. Their development and their growth is directly tied to the fact that throughout this entire story, they've become better friends and formed even more stronger relationships with Deku, which is the reasoning why they are here and why they want to save him. And with that in mind, we also get to cut to a scene where characters like Hiroshima, Hagakure, and Aoyama, who are not actively helping to try and bring Deku back to UA, are still wanting to talk to him and try to convince him anyway. And how this conviction actually causes Endeavor to allow them to take the lead instead of sending Best Jeanist to try and apprehend Deku immediately. And when it comes to Shoto, he doesn't really get a lot of real development in this moment, but he does make a declaration to Deku and explain to Deku that what he is doing may be falling into All For One's plan, and that if he really wants to protect people, he should be near UA actually protecting them instead of just being out there on his own and potentially getting himself killed. And how when he is saying this, we do get some added animation of Deku moving his head and trying to break out of the ice wall as we see Shoto trying to reinforce it with his quirk. And this is where we get probably one of the best scenes in this episode, and how it starts with "You Say Run." So we already know it's gonna be great. Because Deku eventually breaks out of the ice wall, but we get to see Mineta using a new move that is officially named in this episode to try and get him to stay put, which is something showing that Mineta has grown as a character, as well as developed from the moment where we get him at USJ, and that the reasoning why he thinks Deku is cool is not because of his power, but that even though he's willing to cry, he is still willing to believe in himself and act even if he is scared. And this led to some controversies in the manga that I will bring up now about the idea that Mineta may be gay, with the idea that he was falling for Deku, but it seems to be more of a friendly falling than actually romantic. But you know, the internet's gonna internet, what are you gonna do? But even in this moment, Deku is still trying his hardest to try and get his friends off his back. And we get a slight change from the manga to the anime, where in the manga, he just throws Mineta to the roof, while in the anime, he softly places him on the roof. And as Deku is about to go full foe 100% and try to get out of the way, Uraraka comes in and tries to help him. And from here, this is where we get Uraraka's development and growth, as well as a reused flashback showing the scene from the Kamino incident where she believes that Bakugo would not like being saved by the students. Now she thinks that that is no longer her and that she is going to go out of her way to save Bakugo, and how that is not her anymore, and how she is going to go out of her way to save Deku even if he doesn't want it. But unfortunately, Deku gets away, but this is where we get the best sequence of animation in this episode, beginning with a combination of everyone sending up Ida into the sky flying, where we see Mina use a new version of her Acid Man to cover Ida, as we see the other characters, including Tokoyami, pushing both Bakugo and Shoto on a rail system up into the air, Shoto using his heat wave to boost them even further up in the air as Uraraka comes in and makes the load even lighter, as they make a declaration that there's only one person in this moment that can really help and save Deku, as we get Bakugo sending up Ida in this Acid Man using a new move called Explosive Speed Turbo Cluster, and how this may be the move that he actually gained during the war arc, but we do not see the rainbow aesthetic, unfortunately, so it may have just been a one-time thing during the war. But as this is all happening, we get the final moment of this entire sequence as Yusei Run is about to end, where Ida is able to finally catch up to Deku and grab onto Deku's hand. And as earlier in the episode, Deku believed that they were unable to catch up to him and that they should leave him alone, Ida ties back into the initial flashback that we get at the beginning of this episode in reference to the idea about how he, very much like Deku during the Stain fight, where he's willing to stick his nose into places where it doesn't belong because that's what it means to be a hero, and that he will not let go of a child's hand that is crying, which leads to Deku and Ida crying in this moment. This entire sequence is just very emotional. I just really enjoy how they were able to adapt this moment from the manga perfectly well in the anime. But I will say that this isn't the only moment that is perfectly adapted in the anime from the manga. because we do get Kirishima and we see that he does also have some development and growth when it comes to Deku. And even after that great moment, we do not stop with the character's development and growth, because we get Kirishima, who apparently remembers the past of a kid that actually rescued a friend and how he finally connects it to that kid being Deku. And we get reused scenes in a flashback format of Kirishima's backstory, as well as the scene where Deku saves Bakugo from episode 2, confirming that the kid in Kirishima's backstory is actually Deku. As well as we get not a real moment of development necessarily for Mina, but you could say that this is development because her speech to Deku to try and get him to stay and come back to UA with them is that she wants to continue going to school with them and how she doesn't want to lose anyone else, most likely in reference to Midnight, who died during the war, and that she was very heavily affected by it by crying constantly even after the war had concluded days later. And that's pretty much all of the development and growth as well as flashbacks that we're going to be getting in this episode from most of the characters from Class 1A, except for one final student. Because for the rest of this episode, we're going to be focusing on the relationship between Deku and Bakugo. Because Deku begins to talk about and give a speech about how he's scared and how he doesn't want to cause anyone any more trouble, where we get Bakugo beginning his own speech. And what this speech is a way to convince Deku to come back to UA, but is also in a way Bakugo's apology. And he pretty much just apologizes for all of the horrible things that he did to Deku. He gave his reasonings for why he did these things, and how this entire apology from Bakugo was done flawlessly. Because we get the great use of flashbacks that we see between Deku and Bakugo in their past, going from being kids even to them being in UA. As well as we really get a really good translation of what we get in the manga and the anime, where we get to see that in the manga, just going down the panels, we see these characters go from being kids to being in middle school to being in UA. But in the anime, it's done in a way where the transition feels natural and it doesn't just pop in instantly. It goes from them being kids, where we actually get to hear Bakugo giving his speech in the voice of a child, to him going into middle school, but it focusing on different perspectives before transitioning both of them into their UA uniform. I think it was done fantastically, but what I also liked about this moment is that during the scene, we get to see that Deku is consistently still ragged and dirty throughout all of the transitions, because it's still a representation of what is going on in the present. And how the apology itself is punctuated by Bakugo finally referring to Deku as Izuku as he gives his actual apology and saying that he's sorry. Which many people have issues with the fact that Deku doesn't necessarily reiterate or really give a rebuttal to Bakugo's speech and his apology. However, we already know that even though Deku knows that he was bullied by Bakugo, that it really didn't affect him in the way that people think, and that while he understands that what Bakugo did to him is bad, he also still looked up to the more positive qualities that Bakugo had. So the bullying aspect for Deku really wasn't what the entire point of this entire bully arc was about, but was more focused on Bakugo and how he would grow from it. And Bakugo's speech pretty much ends with the idea that what Deku was doing is not necessarily wrong, but if he wants to save people, that he has to do it together with the other students of Class 1A to really achieve his goals and really push them forward to a brighter and better future. And as Deku begins to pass out as he apologizes for the horrible thing that he said to the Class 1A students, we do get a small scene of actually showing Deku pass out as the real challenge via what Uraraka and Momo says begins. And we're getting to the end of the episode where we do get to see that Deku wakes up in front of the UA barrier, as well as the reveal of what 13 actually looks like. And to those who don't know, 13 is a very beautiful woman and has the quirk of black hole. And this is the first time that we've actually seen her face proper. And a little bit of tidbit about this is that in the official English translations, 13 was referred to as a man, but is actually very feminine and is actually a she. And that this mostly has to do with the idea that it was not really stated whether or not they were male or female at the beginning of the story, but now it was confirmed that they are female. And from there, we do get a really good look at the UA barrier as it's explained to Deku the purpose of the barrier is and what has been happening across the entire spectrum of Japan while he was gone. We do get an added scene that really shows the scale of the UA barrier surrounding the entirety of UA, as everyone, including Sero as well as Hagakure, put in their 1 cent about what was going on with the UA barrier and what's going on with UA. And something interesting that I want to bring out is that I've mentioned pretty much every character in Class 1A saying or doing something and showing their relationship with Deku except Aoyama. Once again, keep that in the back of your mind because that is going to be important. You will see soon. But yes, after that moment, we do get to see some civilians begin to chant angrily and how they are basically referring to how they do not want Deku back at UA because doing so could put them in jeopardy. And how this is something that Deku more or less foreshadowed was going to happen, and we see a very small animation of him bagging back and turning around, but is luckily enough stopped by Uraraka as the episode ends with her trademark question of who saves the heroes when they are in danger. And yeah, that's pretty much this episode of My Hero Academia. This is probably the episode many people were looking forward to, me included, and I think the anime pulled it off with near perfection. Nothing was really cut. Everything was included in the animation, and everything was very much animated extremely well. There was very few, if not minimal, just still shots, and the still shots that we did get were for the emphasis of certain punctuating parts of the story. Everything flowed near fluidly in my opinion, and I thought that this episode is probably, if not the perfect way to adapt an episode of anime, if not the perfect way to adapt a manga chapter or manga chapters in the series of My Hero Academia near perfectly. But yeah, that's all I really have for my breakdown for My Hero Academia Season 6, Episode 23. We have 2 more episodes left, so get excited because I am going to be excited to both review and watch those episodes when they come out. And if you want to see my breakdown for those next 2 episodes, why not subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit that notification bell to be notified for whenever I upload more content pertaining to the My Hero Academia anime. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!